When we start learning to draw, there's usually an emphasis on lines, on shapes, and on outlining. And this is understandable with its probable linking back to copying cartoons in our childhood. And yet as adults, going beyond the beginner level of drawing, lines, shapes, and outlines can leave us unable to draw many subjects and scenes effectively. If we're thinking lines, shapes, and outlines, how do we convey this scene? How do we convey the tired, weathered stones? How do we convey the different textures of the grass, of these shrubs, of these taller plants? I can draw straight lines, but that's going to give these steps a smoothness, a hardness, a sharpness that they certainly don't have in real life. I want to suggest that rather than lines, shapes, and outlining, if instead we think marks, forms, edges, more sophisticated drawing possibilities open up to us. Ones that will let us capture scenes that would be otherwise too complex. Let me explain and demonstrate as I draw this scene for us. This drawing took me 47 minutes to draw in real time. So you're watching this about 3.5 times my actual drawing speed. And if you want to see any parts a bit slower, use the cog icon you can see on your screen. So to me, the stairs were always going to be the focal point of this drawing. Never just draw a scene because it's interesting. Have a sense of what's making it interesting, so therefore what I can create an emphasis on, even highlight or strengthen the points that make it particularly engaging for me. So for me, it's these steps. And these would be a good example to compare with a style of drawing which is basically drawing straight lines and shapes and outlines, where all of these steps were created by straight box structures being formed and being drawn and stacked on one another. But if we'd done that, what we would have lost was the 200 years almost of weathering of these Georgian steps. We would have lost the dip in the middle of the steps. We would have lost the rolled leading edges where the sharpness of the edge has been worn off. And we'd have missed the other imperfections in the ways in which they sit on each other. So I'm trying to use marks that let me express the softness of the edge, that let me emphasize the dip to varying degrees in the center of the steps, and generally the fact that these steps have been here for a long time with nature coming up hard against them on all sides. None of which can be really very happily expressed with a nice, clear, crisp, straight line. Weathering tends not to produce straightness. And so the challenge for the artist is, what marks will I use that will create the effect that I'm seeing in my scene, in this case, the weathered steps, that I can use. And now I start on this brick wall to the left and the fence above it. With those stairs, it's also important to notice how perspective affects them. If you look at the tread, that's the part we step on. At the top of the stairs, we don't see much of the tread at all because it's pretty much at eye level. But as the treads move down, we look down on them more and more, and the treads appear wider. The angle of the long side of the tread changes with each step in a fan shape. In fact, it almost looks like part of a fan if you just look at the treads and the shadows between them as the ribs of a fan. And then the angle of the edges also change as the steps move down. So these are the details that we also need to observe. That sometimes when we just think, oh, that's a box, it's easy to miss the subtleties of the shape that we're seeing. And more so than shape, better to think of form. Always think of in 3 dimensions. And I find particularly with
with subjects such as this flaxy plant that I'm drawing, big strappy sword-like leaves. Always important to remember it's 3 dimensions, it's form, parts are coming at me, parts are going away from me, parts are standing up in front of me. I'm not trying to draw all the tall, strappy leaves, I'm trying to create the overall effect that we see of shape and form and light and so forth. But now I'm back on these larger bushes that flank the entrance of these stairs that lead up to one of the more important houses at Port Arthur in Tasmania. And again, with this fence, I don't outline the fence. I don't outline these posts. What I do is I use marks to, in effect, draw the darkness that we see through the posts. And that's a much more effective way to get the effect that we're after. In fact, often if we just draw the lines first, we end up not leaving quite enough width of white for the thickness that we actually want to represent. We've somehow given some of that thickness to the line width, if you get what I mean. But now with this shrub, again, I'm not looking at the leaves and whatever else is on that plant and trying to work out how can I draw that shape, what lines will I use. I'm looking at the overall effect of all of this foliage from a surface texture point of view and how it captures the shade and shadows from the sunlight, as well as taking into account its actual colour, because sometimes we can use hatching to create the effect of a darker colour, quite separate from shade or shadow. So I'm using marks, and you'll see that the marks I use for most of these shrubs differs from the marks I use at the very tops of the shrubs, where I create a different effect. So now we've got these brick walls. So now I don't want to start drawing bricks. That's the kind of thing a beginner may feel obliged to do. Either don't draw any bricks, or if I start, I have to draw them all. What I'm trying to do, though, is create the effect of brickwork, weathered, stained, cracked even brickwork. The last thing I want to do is to start to create marks that oblige me to draw all the bricks. But the truth is, when we look at this photo, the effect is we don't see all the bricks, but we do get a sense of there are bricks here, and that's what I'm trying to capture with my marks. But I'm suddenly not drawing long lines for each of the courses of brickwork. I'm just doing smaller marks to indicate, in part, an effect of bricks. And now I add some hatching for shading for the side of the steps. And what I'm wanting to do here, partly, is to emphasize the whiteness of the treads more, because I feel like they're the key part of this scene, and therefore I want to make them stand out a bit more. When I'm thinking marks and form and creating effects, that puts my focus on creating an overall working of all of my marks. So that it's not what any one or dozen marks are doing, but it's the way they all work together as a whole that will create the effect that I'm after. When I think of shapes that I just have to draw around, I can do a part and think, well, that part's done now, I'll move to another shape. I'll draw some more lines to outline something else. Whereas making marks, focus on creating effects, certainly keeps us looking at the overall balance of the marks we've made. Now, this is another quite different plant, and again, I'm trying to use very different marks to capture this than what I've used for the shrubs on each side of the gateway, and quite different marks to what I'm going to use for that flax-like plant at centre left. And so by using different marks for the plants because we're trying to create the individualized effects of the different foliage. We create a lot of interest, a lot more visual movement and things to bounce off, play off each other in contrast. If I fall into the mistake of really creating a pattern that represents foliage most of the time I see it, which again is a fairly common beginner strategy, what ends up is, in a scene such as this where there's a lot of foliage, it all looks the same, and that tends to lessen interest in our scene, makes it less visually dramatic. So marks to capture the overall visual effect of any foliage that we have, particularly characteristically distinct foliage, particularly paying attention to silhouette edges and to any parts that strongly catch the light, and often drawing a balance of light and dark surface area rather than actually drawing foliage. And so now before I can really finish drawing this flax, I need to work out what's happening with the plant further back, because it's a darker green than what we're seeing on the top of the flax of the swords of leaves that we have there. We end up perceiving the top of the flax as negative space. And so I'm wanting to use that as the means of defining the top of that plant. So again, I'm needing to be thinking marks, capturing effect. And lines, of course, are marks. There's nothing wrong with lines when lines are the most appropriate, helpful thing to do. But so often, just drawing a line, particularly a straight line, particularly creating hard-edged forms, is not necessarily going to be helpful for our scene. And drawing with marks focus on form on 3 dimensions, not 2 dimensions in shapes, but 3 dimensions in form, gives us a lot more options for what we can create, for the effect we can draw. And so now, just got this grass here. I don't want to start drawing lots of grass because, in effect, we look over the grass to see the fence. But that sense of space of looking over is important. So I do some marks to indicate the more visible grass, the more distinct grass that's closest to us, so that as we look at this scene, the eye catches that and now looks past that over the top, and it gives us a much greater depth of plane, because we have to start right in front. We don't just start with the object. We start a long way in front of the object, and then we move back through that, and then we move back through more depth of plane till we get to those furthest trees in the back, or that one tree sticking up at the very back on the left-hand side. So I do these steps. If you've got to this point, please hit the like button. If you've got a friend who you think would benefit, then why not share this video with them? And if you haven't subscribed, well, I've got plenty more videos where this came from. So if you're finding this a way of thinking, of teaching, of drawing helpful or inspiring, then why not check out some more of my content? This photo, of course, I'll post on my channel community page if you'd like to have a go drawing this scene yourself. But otherwise, with a few adjustments now, I think it's done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting. How we think is so important for how we draw. And if I don't like how my drawings are looking, chances are it's not my line skills I need to work on, but my thought processes, the creative thinking that takes place that tells me what marks to put on the paper where, in what order, and determine what I'm actually trying to draw. I want to do more than just copy. I certainly want to take the chance to improve on the photo if I can. But look, whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, whatever level you're drawing it at, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.